Welcome to Punjab. Punjab is a primarily agriculturally run state in northern India with a population of 28 million. The national religion is Sikhism, traditionally recognized through the style of turban, uncut hair, and silver bangle worn on the wrist. Sikhs are a minority and a marginalized ethnic group within India itself, and obviously at a greater extent in the diaspora. Now let's travel halfway around the world to the outskirts of London. They look a little similar, right? Well, it wasn't always like this. In the early 1960s, many Punjabis moved from both Punjab and Africa to the UK in hopes for a better future. Yet growing up in London at the time as a visibly Sikh person wasn't easy.
So I think when I got to Hounslow, there was a large Indian community there, primarily a Sikh community. And it was a combination of people that have come there from India and a combination of people that have come from Africa. It was a very sort of brick based houses and rows of houses. They called them terraced houses. There were a lot of corner stores, and the corner stores were actually run by Indian people. They owned those businesses. There was corner newspaper stores, pubs. There was the high street, which was kind of the main street in the town that had all the shops. But there was a lot of small business everywhere. There was also something called the corner pub. And this was the first time in my life that I'd actually seen, large groups of Caucasian English people. Cars were, not everyone owned cars in those days. Not everybody had, the means to own transport. So a lot of people used the bus and the underground. So it's very common to do that.
I moved to England at the age of 14. It was quite an interesting move because in Africa, where we were originally from, which was East Africa, Kenya, it was the equator there, so it was hot throughout the year. And so when we landed on April 1st in England, it was very cold. And my uncle came to pick us up, and his breath was all steamy and cold coming out, and I had never seen that before. So I was like quite taken back with that and realized what a cold weather we moved to. And so that was my first impression of landing at the airport.
We moved to UK, I think, when I was around 12 years old. We were very excited to move because this was the first time we were leaving Africa to go to another country. So my brother and I and my sister, we were very excited. For us, it was the greatest move ever. We didn't know what to expect because it was a new country. We were going to see different weathers. In Africa, all we saw was the heat, growing up. So it was something we were really, really excited about.
I did feel more comfortable non-English people because I think we kind of had the same past, the beginnings, the culture. With English people, there was actually kind of, even with them, there was a group of people. They were groups of young people that grew up in what we call council estates, which are government-owned housing places. Those people spoke differently. They were not well read. Their English was very different. It was very slang type of English. And growing up in Kenya, we had spoken the Queen's English and not this slang. So it took a while to adjust to the slang. And then there was people that were sort of more middle upper class, and they spoke very differently. They behaved differently, and you could clearly see sort of the class distinction in those days.
So London was crowded. That was another interesting aspect of London. The houses were right next to each other, and they were small. The rooms were small. Streets were small. Hounslow was a nice little town. This high street was forever long, and it had stores after stores after stores, and it had some. One store that we went to often was Marks and Spencer, and you got your groceries there and your bakery goods, and it had clothing, but there were other department stores. And the part that I liked the most was the bakeries. You could go walk into the bakery and you could get fresh pastries, which was something that we grew up in Africa, going to the bakery and getting fresh pastries. So, and the pastries were delicious.
To us, it was beautiful, stores with beautiful clothes, which we had not seen in Africa. So it was really exciting. And then the restaurants, there to try different restaurants, which were all, like burgers and hot dogs. And I don't think we tried some things like that in Africa. It was just something different. The people all seemed really nice. So, it was, I was only 12. So it's like, oh my, this is Wonderland to me, And Southall was very Indian. It had all the Indian restaurants, Indian theater, Indian grocery stores, Indian clothing store. So, you knew where to go if you wanted to buy anything to do with your Indian outfits. And all you could see it was like a little mini India. You could see all Indians everywhere. So it felt, at that point, I don't think we knew anything between what is white people and what's brown people, because we never faced that in Africa. So we never noticed anything different.
So Indian people, there were again two types. There were the people that had come over from Punjab, and there were the people from Kenya, or Africa in general, Uganda, Tanzania. The people that were India generally, worked kind of the menial jobs, and they had come from rural places. This was their first foray into a foreign country. And not to sound snobbish here, but they were not really polished people. They were not aware of the European culture. Growing up in Kenya and have sort of second generation Kenyan, we were much more exposed, to the European culture. We knew very much how to eat with knives and forks, and know that your salad comes first, your soup, so forth. And there was the English manners that had been instilled into us. I'd say more English and European in general. So I think it wasn't as much of a culture gap as it was for those. And I think those people tend to more, the people from Punjab tend to more just stick with their own community and stick to their ways, and didn't really, I think, mix with the English people the same way that the people from Kenya did.
The people the educated English people were polite and nice, and I made friends with many of them. And in going to school, I had English friends, and I would go to their homes, and they were very polite. Their parents were very polite. And then you had the complete opposite. You had the skinheads, and we were always afraid of walking by them because you didn't know what they were going to do to you. You didn't know if they were going to attack you. They would call you names all the time. They called us Packies, and it was just humiliating. Never had experienced racism till we came to London. Didn't even know what racism was. And so that was our first experience at racism. So there were people that were, even if they were racist, the fact they were educated, they treated you with respect. And then there were what we call them commoners, where they weren't educated and financially not as well off. And they resented the fact that Indians came to England and did well. They worked hard. They opened corner stores. They were called corner stores. Every street had a corner store where you could, it's like a 7-Eleven almost, where you could buy really quick ketchup and bread and milk, and you didn't have to go to the grocery store to do that. And so you couldn't walk in London at night by yourself because you didn't feel safe. So the safety was the biggest memory that for a long time I did not want to go back to England.
Well, growing up in UK, initially I didn't face that much discrimination as my brother did because he was wearing a turban, so he faced more than I did. Most of my friends were Indians, while my sister had basically most of her friends were white people. So I don't think she faced as much either, but I don't know. So I used to go out, hang out. I didn't. Once in a while, we would have someone say, something like, well, they didn't know the difference between Sikhs and Pakistanis, so they used to call us Pakistanis. So they would say, Pakis, go home.
One of the things that I noticed in England right away was graffiti on the walls and swearing, right? Like I said, there was a set of English people that were very polite to you and stuff. And I always got this sense that they looked down on you. And I think it's something to do with the British Raj, etc. And then there was the sort of more the lower end working class people that were much more sort of ignorant in nature. So there was a small sect of people, but it was an everyday experience where you would find people calling you a Paki or a Wog, using derogatory terms, telling you that you smell, your food smells, which is ironic that Indian food became the food of England, 30, 40 years later. The English sort of inherited as their food, but they definitely, this is another thing I don't like to do, but we are sort of, I would think of us as the equivalent of the Mexicans, or the Hispanics in this country. And I think the Indians were looked upon as a second-class citizen.
Oh, we were hyper-visible. We knew we were different. And even though the British were in Africa, and we were used to going to the country clubs with them, but in England, there was definitely a division between the English and the Indians and the Punjabis. And the Punjabis all came together. We went to the temple, the Gurdwara, on the weekends, and try to stay together, support each other, help each other, and that was what made it livable.
Being Punjabi and Sikh, there's a large Punjabi Sikh community there, so of course you had to watch how you behave, because growing up we were taught you cannot date, you cannot hang out with guys. So if you were any other people caught you hanging out with guys or dating, it would be a big gossip of the town. It would get back to your parents, and then they make a big deal about it. So we did face that, but my mom was very modern. So as far as she was concerned, if you're honest at home, you tell me what's going on in your life, you will have no problems. So I didn't face, we did face a little bit, but I had my mom always supporting us.
So not only was I an Indian person, I was a Sikh person wearing a turban. So I stood out. Now, luckily I went to school in the area, so there were other Sikh students, but maybe in my school there were less than 20 in a school of, 500-600, less than 20 people wearing turbans. And so it constantly became, I got a lot of unwanted, unfriendly attention as a result of it. They would refer to our turban as a bog roll, which is the equivalent of a toilet paper roll, right? There would be a set of people that would try to knock our turban off. I think when we went to the gym and we went to our PE, our physical education classes, or playing soccer or rugby, etc., and you would go to the showers, you were the only guy with sort of a long hair and on top of your head, right? So it was uncomfortable. People would make fun of it. People looked at you differently. So it I would say was not a good experience. But on the other hand, you kind of, it made you stronger in the long run. That's my belief.
So growing up in Africa, when my grandfather as a young man moved to Africa and then had his wife come there and have his children in Africa, the society, the Sikhs, as they came to Africa, and Hindus, they really valued their culture and their religion. And so as a society, they taught their kids the Sikh culture, going to the temple every weekend, and that was really very big part of our life. And coming together at the temples and learning about our culture and learning about the religion and staying together. And that's what we did in England. We stayed together, we went to each other's homes and kept up the culture. I personally did Sunday school in England and learned how to read and write Punjabi. And so that was very important for us not to forget our culture.
When I was little, my father used to send us to, we used to go to the temple every weekend because my father used to participate in the temple. We used to go to Punjabi classes. My father, it was very important to my father that we speak Punjabi at home. And he always sat down and he told us the stories about our gurus, which is, Sikh, the gurus, where gurus are supposed to be angels from God coming to teach us religion. So he always taught us about our religion. And that's how we knew we were, we knew everything. He would sit down, he would tell us stories, which was so fascinating. And, he always told us that you're a Punjabi, you're a Sikh. So, this is what you are. And going to the Gurdwara, to our temple, taught us that we were Sikhs. And, we did practice being Punjabis at home. It didn't matter what we did outside. But when we came home, there was no English. We had to learn how to speak Punjabi. It was very important to my father.
So I think even though as the Punjabis left for Africa and different parts of Africa, they retained their culture to a certain extent. And your parents and your grandparents, they talked about where we had come from. They talked about the culture. They lived the culture. They embodied the culture. So at the heart of it, you identified with that. And another element there is that, our parents, as they moved to these countries, they weren't in any mixed marriages. So both when your mother and your father are Punjabi and that's their background, you live that every day to a certain extent. And so you bond with that. That's how you think. And then even socially going to the temple, right? You would be with other Sikhs at the temple. You would be at other Sikh events. Your parents' friends largely would be Sikhs. They would have different types of friends, but predominantly Sikhs. So in a sense, you kind of experienced that, and you knew you were Sikh. And they made a big deal of Sikhism and what we believe, and that we're defenders of humanity.
My main influence was my parents, my father. My father was very much both a British and a Sikh. He could live in both worlds very easily. He, being grown up in an English medium school where he learned all his education was in English, and his siblings. And his father, who came to Africa as a young person, also had gone to school and learned in an English school and had learned English to read and write, and so his education was in English. And so my father's influence in Africa when we were there, he taught us how to live amongst the British, how to behave in their presence, and then he also taught us how to be amongst the Indians and how to be amongst the Sikhs and what was required of us. So the culture, both cultures were very much embedded in me. Until today, I can live in both cultures very easily. I fit in both because I know what it takes to be a Sikh and what is expected of me as a Sikh and what's expected of me as living in a Western culture.
My influence to be Punjabi was growing up in a Punjabi home. You learn the traditions, all the Punjabi traditions. You go to the Gurdwara, you learn to pray. But when you go outside, you're in a different world. You have to fit into that world, right? So you have peer pressure. You need to fit in because if you don't fit in, people are going to outcast you. So you automatically, going to school, you learn the British ways. And that's what we did at school. We learned the British ways. We came home, we learned the Punjabi ways. So we somehow managed to make our life or adjust ourselves to do both. You know, you come home, you're a Punjabi girl, and you go to outside and you're a British girl. But really, it wasn't very difficult because our parents weren't that strict. They were open to ideas. They were very modern. So, you know, they wanted us to fit in both sides. They wanted us to know both, you know, they wanted us to know about our religion, but they also wanted us to know how to fit in the outside world.
My father believed in, the family sticks together. The family is very strong as a unit. Individually, you're not much, but if you're a family and you take care of the family, that you can be much stronger and take care of each other. I think that was a strong influence. One of my uncles became a dentist, and my father always talked about education, the importance of education and doing well. So I think those were sort of the education, and then watching, you know, my dad's siblings, educate themselves, etc. I think that became a big thing of it. Also, my father believed in, he believed in sort of being fearless. He believed in taking chances. He believed in being bold. And I think that sort of was imparted onto me.
As a firstborn, you're an example for your siblings, so that's very important. How you behave, your siblings will learn from you. The other was the culture of having arranged marriages, not to date, because that's not part of our culture. So because of my father's influence, I was able to really respect that and go with it and have an arranged marriage.
Well, my father died when I was 15, so there was not much, you know, it was my mom's expectations after that. Of course, my father wanted me to be an astronaut, which never happened because, I never pursued it after. But my father wanted us to be educated, to be able to stand on our feet and never depend on a man, because it was very important to him that we be able to be, on our own and independent. And he believed in arranged marriages, and it didn't happen. My mother wanted us to be independent too, of course, and have a good education. So we got the education. Of course, we didn't do the arranged marriage stuff, but that's life. And they wanted us kids to know about our religion too, which we have, because we learn what we have learned from our parents, we've passed on to our children.
So my parents' expectations, in different areas, I'll start with education. They definitely expected me to, go to college, get a degree, get a professional career, make decent money, have a good standard of living. It was all those things that they really believed that education was the key to success. And then I think on a personal front, they expected me to sort of, continue to wear my turban, be a good Sikh, marry a Sikh person, keep the culture going, all of those things.
My expectations was to live within the constraints of our culture. However, because my father was able to understand the Western culture and had very many English friends in Africa and in England, he understood that as children we would like to do things that the English kids did, and so he never stood in our way of us mixing with the kids, English kids, bringing them over to our house, introducing them to our culture, and allowing us to go to their homes and learning their culture. And food-wise, it wasn't just Indian food at our house. It was eating both the Western food and the Indian food.
I wish I had listened to them more and gone to college and finished my college rather than going to college 30 years later and trying to finish my education. But when you're young, you don't do exactly. So that is the only regret I have, basically, from what their expectations were for me. But I think I pretty much filled the expectations. I think they're very, very happy with what turned out. the only regret I have is about my education. Other than that, I think I'm happy. I am where I'm supposed to be. I have no regrets.
I think my expectations were largely driven by my parents' expectations because I wanted them to be proud of me. So I think I did all of those things to be proud. But I also wanted to not always go down the beaten path. And I think in the back of my mind, I always felt going down the traditional route on everything, known as route in England, you know, there would be a level of excitement or individuality missing if I chose that path.
The value of family, my father taught first and foremost is always family. And family at every cost. So my father was one person that always brought family together, and his siblings till date tell me because of him we are such a close family, because for him family together brought strength. You could get through any hardships as long as you had family. And so that value I carry with me. I bring it to my marriage. I tell my child about that. No one can live on an island by themselves. You need others. And if your family can support you through good times and bad times, and not that we're perfect, not that each of us are not individuals, and not that we don't fight, but at the end of the day, we realize we are individuals, we have our own views, and we support those views, and we forgive each other, and we come together, and we're there no matter what. We're always there for each other, and that to me is the foundation I live by.
My mother was, I think thanks to my mom, she has embedded in me good values about family, because at the end of the day, family is everything. My mom held us together after my father passed away. You know, my brother, my sister, and me, and we're still together. We're such a close-knit family that we hold each other, and those are the same values I have taught my daughter, that family is everything at the end of the day, and family means everything. So you fight for your family, you stand by your family, and those values I have put into my daughter, and I hope she carries on the same way we have. My mom is the greatest thing to me. She has taught me everything what I know today. She has taught me how to be strong. She has taught me what's good, what's wrong, and what's right, and those are the values my mother's, you know, how to respect everyone, how to respect your religion, how to respect someone else's religion, how to respect the other person. And I've learned that all from my mother.
So I think, again, as I said, my values and how that's affected my life. I think, you know, my father believed in family. He believed in accountability. He believed in responsibility. And I think all of these things sort of played a part in my life as I got older. You know, my father died when I was 13. My mother became my sole responsibility, at least mentally in my head. And I've taken that responsibility very seriously. I also, you know, my concern is that my entire family does well. Me doing well by myself is not good enough. It's not, it wouldn't bring the joy. You know, anything I would gain in life, I would want to share with my family.